So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Adderholt. I now recognize the witness for 5 minutes of testimony. You're recognized, Administrator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, submit my opening comments for the record, and what I'd like to do is just talk to you.
Very well.
Thank you, sir. I want to say prior to us going live, talking to the ranking member, talking about the House office buildings, it flashed me back to so many pleasant memories. And that's why I just thoroughly enjoy the opportunities to engage with you all, as I have, Mr. Chairman, with you twice, one virtually and one in person, as I have with Congressman Adderholt, as he mentioned, going to Huntsville. Congressman Garcia, recognizing that I've been at Armstrong in the part of California where I understand you are. I saw Congressman Case on the video, and just to say to him, I've been to Hawaii. I've been to the Big Island. I've gone up both of those big mountains on the Big Island. One that we're doing a lot of environmental research, and the other that we've got all those telescopes. Congressman Ruppersberger, by the way, I want to give credit where credit is due, because so much of what the chairman and the ranking member talked about in the course that we're on now, with a dual track of not only government space, but also commercial space, is as a result of the passage of the 2010 NASA bill that we passed unanimously in the Senate, and was down to the last day before the August break. And we didn't have the votes, and Steny Hoyer didn't want to bring it up, because he was torqued off that he says the House always has to take the Senate position on the last moment. And I said, but this is something that you approve of. And he put it on the suspension calendar, and we didn't have the votes in the morning. And Dutch Ruppersberger and John Culberson took me by the hand for the entire day into the evening on the House floor, as we visited with recalcitrant members. And by the time that vote came at 11 o'clock at night, we had a 3/4 vote, far exceeding the 2/3. And then Congresswoman Ming, I see you also, and New York City, the state of New York contributes so much to our aerospace industry, both aviation and space, as well as defense. So I just wanted to say that personally, having seen you all on the screen here. And again, I come back to Congressman Ruppersberger. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have had the votes that day. And we wouldn't be on the course that we're on. And little did I know back then that fast forward 12 years that I'd be here trying to explain all this and satisfy you that you're getting your money's worth out of what you're appropriating in both the government program and the commercial program. Now, let me pick up right there and tell you this is a $26 billion budget. It's got an aggressive aeronautics plan. I'm down to just 40 seconds. I want to say that we're going to launch Artemis this year. That'll be the unmanned one. You've already seen the efforts on the lunar lander in the private sector, and now getting competition so we can keep that price down. You've seen what we've succeeded in the area of science. This is a very aggressive science budget. You've seen how we're addressing climate change in the budget. You see that we're doing more in trying to do aviation manufacturing, and I'll close with this. We are going to fly the first all-electric airplane in about a month. We're going to fly by the end of the year, both of these out at Edwards, which is the Armstrong Space Research Center. We're going to fly the low sonic boom supersonic transport, which will be a way for commercial aviation in the future. It's a pleasure, Mr. Chairman, to be here with you.
Thank you for that testimony, Administrator Nelson, and your full written testimony will be entered into the record. We're going to begin a series of questions now, 5 minutes for each member. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes of questions. First area I want to get into won't surprise you. It's about the Mobile Launcher 2, the ML2. This is the pad from which the Artemis 4 rocket is to launch in the year 2027, and it's been problematic in its course. That it hasn't gone well. ML2's development. I know this is already on your radar screen, and it's something that we ought to talk about, particularly because there's an IG audit being completed on the subject now. It's now 4 years since the contract was first awarded. I am concerned with how much we have to show for the $500 million plus that's already been spent on it. Administrator Nelson, if Congress were fully to fund NASA's request of $232 million in FY23 for the ML2, how can we be assured that we'll see good project progress on the ML2?
You're right, Mr. Chairman. It's over cost and it's behind. I don't like it. It's going to cost more money. And I eagerly await the publication of the IG report, which I think is going to have some very good insight into the mistakes that have been made. Having said that, if we're going to launch an evolved Artemis SLS, which right now is scheduled for Artemis 4, which will launch the core of the Gateway plus the human capsule Orion. If we're going to launch that, we got to have a more powerful rocket. And when, as I mentioned, the 2010 NASA bill, we purposely made the SLS evolvable so that it was, by changing the rocket more powerfully, that you could continue to have and meet from this system the loads that we were going to be needing to launch. Back in the Saturn V days, they just had one rocket. They had 2 mobile launch platforms. They didn't have to change them. In this case, we have to have a second mobile launch platform, which is the old Saturn V second platform. And it's got to be altered in order to accommodate the heavier loads in the taller rocket. And it is what it is. I don't like how this has gotten out of control. We're trying to bring it back under control. And you have my pledge to try to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Well, as with any public or private entity, there are wins and losses and successes and failures. Without going into what they are, we know they're there. Here's the question. As NASA runs 35 or so major projects identified by GAO, what management lessons has the agency learned for how you can effectively protect American taxpayers while developing unique and important scientific instruments?
You constantly have to ask the hard questions, Mr. Chairman. And by the way, it's not 35, it's about 100 simultaneous projects that are going on in NASA. And you accurately, and the ranking member noted that this is one of the most aggressive schedules of NASA. We've been working closely with the GAO to respond to the GAO recommendations, and we've made significant progress in closing out the GAO recommendations, in strengthening the acquisition practices, Mr. Chairman. And again, I call your attention to the coming IG report. I think that will also be very instructive.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. I now recognize our ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nelson, recognizing we've got limited time this morning, and as you may be aware, we're having a joint session of Congress this morning, so we're trying to compact everything in. But I'd like to run through a series of questions and, of course, try to be succinct as much as possible. And if there's anything else that we need to follow up with additional information, we can do that later. But one thing that this subcommittee has provided is hundreds of millions of dollars for development of nuclear thermal propulsion. And I'm curious as to why NASA has made, so little progress on NTP development and an in-space flight demonstration. The question would be, where has the money gone, and why does it seem like we don't have much to show for it?
Well, as you know, I have already said publicly that I want to thank you all because the Appropriations Committee in both the House and the Senate have kept nuclear propulsion alive, even while the White House refused to recommend it in the past until this coming fiscal year 23 President's recommended budget. And we got the door open. They recommend 15 million. That's nowhere near the 150 million or so that you all have insisted on in the past. But it's also significant that the President's recommendation, 10 million of which is for nuclear thermal and 5 million of which is for nuclear electric. And what that's saying is, for the future, we got to look at both. We got to look at all kinds of propulsion because of the necessity of getting to Mars faster with humans so that you don't have to stay on the surface of Mars for a year or two until the planets realign. If you can get there faster, you can stay a couple of weeks and you can come back. And right now, of course, we don't have the capability of keeping humans alive on the surface of Mars for a year or two. So this is important. And I think there was a significant change in the attitude of OMB at, I might say, our urging, because, and what your instructions have been to us over the past several years. There's one other thing on nuclear fission. We got a probe that's digging on the South Pole next year to see if there's water. If there's water, there's rocket fuel. If you're going to make hydrogen and oxygen from water on the South Pole, you need lots of electricity. And we're going to have to be able to do that as well. So I want to thank you for what you've done in the past, and I want to urge you all to continue that in the future.
Let me switch over to about returning to the moon and establishing a permanent U.S. presence before our adversaries. And that is critical that the American have leadership and that we have dominance in that area. Of course, we cannot risk safety for the sake of urgency, but we also cannot exercise complacency while our adversaries sprint to try to take the next frontier. So to that point, when do you think we can actually expect U.S. boots back on the moon?
Our schedule, Mr. Chairman, and this is not lightly said, is in 2025. We're going to launch unmanned this year. Then 2 years later, we're going to launch with a crew that will orbit the moon, come back, check out all the systems. And then 1 year later, which is 25, we're going to rendezvous in a lunar elliptical orbit that's a polar orbit. The crew is going to transfer into a lander. The winner of that competition for the first landing is SpaceX. And they will go and land on the surface, come back and rendezvous with Orion, and Orion will bring them home. That should be 25, Congressman.
Thank you. I see my time is up, so I yield back.
Mr. Adderholt, the chair recognizes for 5 minutes Representative Grace Meng of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Adderholt. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here today. I wanted to talk about orbital space debris removal. Last December, I joined our Vice President Harris at the inaugural National Space Council meeting where the U.S. Space Priorities Framework was unveiled. It stated the U.S. will lead in the responsible, peaceful, and sustainable exploration and use of outer space. And to achieve this, will increase efforts to mitigate, track, and remediate space debris. I think this approach is right, but to get there, we're going to need to tackle small space debris removal. If we don't, it could hinder our growing space economy. Some estimate this growing sector could be valued at over $1 trillion by 2040. Yet there are significant mission-ending challenges that could prevent this from small space debris the size of a softball or smaller. Due to the high speed of such small debris, human spaceflight and other missions are at risk of failure. To overcome this challenge, I believe we're going to need to track and remove it to ensure space is available to our future generations. I wanted to ask if you can discuss how NASA is working to shape international norms around space debris and what other countries can do to help track, mitigate, and remove it. And in the President's fiscal year 23 budget request, can you discuss how the over $30 million for orbital debris research will help meet the challenge of detecting and removing small space debris?
Yes, ma'am. Other countries can help by stop the putting up of junk. And the two most egregious examples are the ASAT tests by the Chinese government in 2007 and the Russian government of an ASAT test last year, which put up tens of thousands, both of those pieces right in low Earth orbit. Unbelievably, the Russian government putting it up that threatened the space station, upon which is habitated Russian cosmonauts. And I think that's an example where one hand of the Russian government not knowing what the other hand was doing. Now, how are you going to get it down? There is so much junk up there and so many dead satellites. We're talking about a major effort And you just noted $30 million in our budget request to you for supporting our request for space situational awareness and orbital debris measurements, for monitoring it, for mitigation, and for working with the Department of Defense, which tracks the larger objects, usually softball size and greater. Less than that, it's hard to track. But I can tell you, it could be a paint chip. And on an astronaut doing an EVA, a spacewalk, something as small as that hit it at a huge velocity, then you're talking about serious damage. So one of the other things that y'all have got to decide is who's going to have the responsibility for this. And I would encourage you to go on and get that done. It's been talked about in the last administration that it should be the Department of Commerce. Others have said Department of Transportation. I think there's a lot of efforts down toward the Department of Commerce, but that's your decision. And I'd like for that will help us if we can get our act together, coordinating all of the agencies of the federal government. I don't want to take all your time, Congresswoman.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you on this. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Meng. At this time, the chair recognizes Representative Garcia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, it's great to see you again. Hope you're doing well. Last time we talked, we were discussing the aircraft that we use up at Edwards Air Force Base, the chase aircraft, F-15, F-18 type aircraft. They're old, they're out of flight time, they're out of fatigue life, and frankly, they're a bit of a safety concern as well as a budget suck right now for parts and obsolescence challenges that they have. They're ASABO, their availability numbers are extremely low. One of the aircraft's actually older than I am, which says a lot. And it's really becoming, in my opinion, it's not just a tactical or operational problem, it's a safety problem. We're going to lose a pilot's life here imminently if we don't do something. We chatted about it last time, and you guys, NASA took the action within the FY22 Omni package that we passed back in March to brief us on the replacement plan and what's going on. Within 180 days of the bill, we asked that you provide us a quarterly update to the committee on the progress of figuring out the replacement plans. Have you been able to look at this and what can we do? I mean, even the Blue Angels right now are flying, F-18E model Super Hornets that are, a third of the age of the aircraft we're flying out at Edwards Air Force Base. And as you know, the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds are required to fly the oldest jets in the fleet, and these aircraft out at Armstrong are actually a lot older than that. So can you just let me know how what's going on there, and what can we do? And I've got a different question on another subject after that, if you can.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Yes, Congressman, everything you said's accurate. We have been getting hand-me-downs, and they're aging. The parts are not there. We need newer aircraft that we are putting through extreme testing. And it's my hope that we are moving in that direction. Everything that you said is accurate. And I want to see that sooner than later.
Does that require something from DOD and the Pentagon to help facilitate that for you? Who do we need to go talk to? I mean, it's got to be more than just hope on this one, right? We actually have to have an acquisition plan and a coordination MOU of some sort in place with DOD to transfer these aircraft. Does someone in NASA have this as an action to go yes, lead this project for us?
Yes, sir. Our flight research folks are doing that. We're working with DOD to identify basically used aircraft, F-15s and F-18s, which could be transferred to NASA upon their retirement from the military service for NASA operation and or parts, as well as maintaining that current fleet. Yes, sir. We are aggressively talking to DOD.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have a whole bunch of questions I'll submit for the record regarding HLS and the X-plane programs, as well as SLD. But I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what's going on with Artemis right now. I know we rolled her out for the wet dress rehearsal. Had a couple leaks and failures. We've put her back into the bay. What is your perspective? What's our timing looking like? I know there's a get well plan in the bay, and then we're waiting for Celestial Mechanics to cooperate for a launch. What's your over under on a launch this year for Artemis?
Well, it's going right now, I would say, in August.
Okay.
It will then check out uncrewed all the systems. It's about a 30-day mission. It will go further than any American human spacecraft has gone. And it will set the stage for 2 years later for the first crew. And that will orbit the moon and come home checking out all the human sustaining systems. And then about a year later is when we rendezvous in lunar elliptical polar orbit and send the lander down to the surface.
Okay, so you're thinking August timeframe for the go, and obviously pending a successful dress rehearsal coming up next month, right?
That's correct. Okay. As a matter of fact, it ought to be going back out for a wet dress rehearsal very soon.
Thank you, our Administrator. Mr. Chair, back to you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Case, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and aloha, Mr. Administrator. I deeply appreciated your kind comments about my home state and visiting Hawaii Island, the Big Island. That is my home island, so either that was a fortuitous statement or you're very well briefed, or both. Hawaii has been a very proud part of NASA and space exploration from the very beginning, since we tracked some of the earliest spacecraft across the Pacific, the only tracking station over on Kauai, bringing us across, and of course picked up many of our astronauts. And we have proudly hosted the world's best telescopes and also the world's best analog sites, planetary analog sites. I understand that's the new word for HABs, what I always called HABs, the best places to practice on landing on the moon as elsewhere. So I appreciate the connection with Hawaii. And I do want to say, by the way, Mr. Administrator, that I completely endorse the comments at the outset by both my chair and my ranking member on the incredible opportunities for NASA, but also I think the incredible challenges to NASA to pull off such an array of initiatives in a way that is fiscally responsible. The risks of failure along these lines are high, and yet the opportunities, if we do it right, are incredible as well. And so I think we all share the concerns that we are fiscally responsible and judicious with the taxpayers' money as we go through this process. I wanted to talk to you about of STEM education, and in particular women and minorities in STEM and in NASA and in science, because the promise of NASA has not only been to the American people that we would lead the world in some of the greatest explorations that humankind has ever undertaken, but that it would translate back home into advancement in earth sciences, in advancement in education, and an advancement in an area that is still woefully negligent, which is the presence of women and minorities in STEM in general, and for that matter in NASA itself. And so I appreciate your increase in the Office of of STEM engagement, where you have proposed to go up another 9% over FY 2022, but that's on a $150 million base. And obviously 9% of $150 million is a lot different from a 10% increase on $7 billion for some of your other programs. And so I simply have to ask you the question, do you think that this is sufficient to pull off this side of NASA, which is not just about NASA, it's about national policy to get more women, more minorities into STEM? The fact that, Artemis and others are carrying women and minorities out into space and to the moon is an incredible statement. But that is a few people, and it's an inspiring statement, but it's going to take a lot more than that. I don't know whether we're doing enough.
Well, thank you. The truth be told, I'd like a lot more money in STEM. But remember, we have a secret sauce that a lot of people don't. And that is, by the very nature of you all spending all of this money on these high technology programs, that is like a magnet for students. That, because of their excitement from being little kids and their eyes getting as big as saucers when they meet one of our astronauts, and we use our astronauts vigorously out into schools and universities, it draws them to this area. And by virtue of the fact that you all are funding this next major adventure out into the cosmos, be it the space telescope, be it Artemis going back to the moon, be it getting ready to go to Mars, that in itself is an attraction like a magnet that is bringing students into all the things that STEM stands for: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Remember what happened as a result of Apollo a half a century ago. We had 2 generations of students that came in those fields of STEM. So what we're trying to do is leverage the excitement of these programs that you are funding with bringing kids into these fields. One final point. We love our interns. We want to expand the number of interns. We have about 1,600 interns. They're paid interns, not like in the Senate or the House. These are paid internships. We end up hiring 30% of our interns. We want more interns because what we find is they just blossom. They're eager to get there, and then they just blossom. And what we've had interns that have come up with ideas that have been incorporated into our space and aeronautics technologies.
Thank you so much, Administrator. I'll submit some more questions, but I appreciate your comments and hope to see you back in Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Mr. Klein, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Administrator Nelson, it's good to see you. I want to jump in with some questions about Wallops, one of my favorite places there in Virginia. One of only 4 major rocket launch locations in the United States. NASA's been launching rockets from Wallops since 1945, resupplying rockets for the International Space Station, moon missions, scientific balloon research, education programs, and more emanate from Wallops. And as you know, Rocket Lab has been ready to go for over a year, but the Autonomous Flight Termination System, AFTS software suite that's necessary for them to launch with, has been continuously delayed. NASA's in charge of writing and debugging the code there, and it's caused a loss in launches that otherwise would have gone from Wallops, including Capstone mission. Can you tell me what the status is of the AFTS software project as it pertains to Rocket Lab and its operations from Wallops? And can you give me an updated expected completion date?
I will, and Congressman, it's it's not only that that's stunting the growth of Wallops, it's also the bridge. We are working on this. We had to do the same thing down there at the Kennedy Space Center, the autonomous system. You just couldn't have the launch frequency that is going on down there now between all the government, military, intelligence, NASA, commercial missions, unless you get that autonomous system. We're testing on a system right now for rocket labs. It is going well, and I'll just have to give you an up-to-date report later on. Now, may I say about the bridge, please?
Sure.
It's the top priority of NASA on infrastructure. We're afraid the bridge is going to fall in the water. And if it doesn't, it's a humpback bridge, and larger rockets that should be launched there can't get over the bridge because of the incline. Longer rockets, in other words, when they put them on a trailer. I thought I had in the 22 appropriations bill an agreement with others to get some other infrastructure in exchange for getting the Wallops Bridge. And that did not occur. That's a great disappointment for me personally, because it is our top. We were able to take care of the roof down at New Orleans that had blown off because we got a hurricane supplement. And we got that money to redo the roof. But our first priority is the Wallops Bridge. So I sure would appreciate some help.
Thank you for emphasizing that need. Appreciate that. Let me switch gears a little bit over to option B. And earlier this year, you announced NASA was contracting with SpaceX for a second crewed mission to the moon, known as option B, to safely land astronauts as early as 2026, while NASA works to on-ramp additional providers for readiness later in the decade. Can you elaborate on the importance of option B in helping to avoid another gap in missions to the moon? And in helping to add more capability into the Artemis program?
Absolutely, Congressman. The way that the competition went and was awarded to SpaceX, there is a provision for an extension, if you will, of that award, which is option B. And that, if that is negotiated with SpaceX, that would allow, if we're landing in 25 on the first one, that would allow another landing in 26. Simultaneously, as a result of what we've requested in this 23 budget, and some of the bridge money that you all gave us in 22 appropriations allows us to get going on another competition under the theory, and of which you have insisted, both authorizing as well as appropriations in both houses. You have insisted that we have competition on the lander. And so we're getting that competition going. And under the rules of and the laws, the statutes of procurement, it means that it's a separate competition, and SpaceX is not a part of that. So once we got a winner in that competition, then we've got two landers that we will decide in the future. And that competition that also has a demonstration of uncrewed landing and a crewed landing. Then the space program has an option of looking between two as to what is going to be the sustained lander for the future. And that's what's going on, Congressman.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Mr. Chris, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nelson, let me first say what a joy it is to see you, my wonderful friend. And I'm admiring your highwayman picture behind you. Have you had that a long time? I'm a big fan of those.
As a matter of fact, this, interestingly, is a NASA artist that was under the NASA program. I do have personally a highwayman. I also have a Beanie Bacchus, but this one is a NASA picked artist that I purchased years ago named Kent Sullivan. Thank you.
That's my highwayman.
Oh, that's great. Who's
That's Boca Ciega Bay in St. Petersburg.
And who's the artist?
This one was Gibson.
Yeah, he's certainly one of them.
He was great. He was great. And you're great. And thanks for everything you're doing at NASA, Senator. You've long championed fixed price contracts with commercial industry as the most effective way to keep programs on track and control costs and strengthen American industry, all while ensuring our safety. And I've seen firsthand, as have you, obviously, how NASA's private partners have brought thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of new economic activity in Florida. Can you discuss briefly the importance of having industry and government work together for NASA, for America?
Absolutely. And as I was given credit where credit is due at the beginning of the testimony today to Dutch Ruppersberger, he was very significantly instrumental in us passing the 2010 NASA bill that set us off on this dual course of government program in space and a concurrent and parallel commercial program that has turned into this public-private partnership that you see today. Yes, right. Very important.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm curious, and you've already been asked this because I wasn't at the outset of the meeting, forgive me, but in terms of manned spaceflight, I think there's some kind of a launch this summer in the same spacecraft that would be manned eventually. When do you think would be the earliest we could get the manned one up?
Well, as you know, we are launching humans every 6 months now to the International Space Station. And
yeah, but I think this is a different kind of mission I'm talking about.
That's correct.
The big one, you know.
You're referring to the largest rocket ever. We're going to launch it in August. It will be uncrewed, and all the systems will be tested, returned safely through the fiery heat of reentry with about Mach 34 coming into the Earth's atmosphere. And then 2 years later, we will launch the first crew. And 1 year after that, we will do the first landing, which is 25.
25. Senator, I don't know a better question to stop on. I will yield back, and please give your beautiful wife, Grace, my best wishes.
Thank you, Congressman. It's a pleasure. You've been a lifelong friend. Thank you.
Sir. God bless you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chris. Mr. Palazzo, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
And thank you, Chairman Cartwright and Ranking Member Adderholt, for having this meeting. Senator Nelson, thank you for being here. I look forward to these hearings, especially the NASA hearing each year. Stennis Space Center is NASA's premier facility for propulsion test operations. In a practical sense, Stennis Space Center's main budget line is rocket propulsion test. The president's budget request for rocket propulsion test shows a negligible change for fiscal year 23 and no expected changes on the horizon, leading one to believe level funding will ensure this facility is meeting both NASA and industry demand for testing for the foreseeable future. I would like to read a line directly from NASA's fiscal year 23 budget requests. NASA's Rocket Propulsion Test program maintains and manages a wide range of facilities capable of ground testing rocket engines and components under controlled conditions. This test infrastructure includes facilities located across the United States, and the program provides a single entry point for any user of NASA rocket test stands. RPT retains a skilled workforce capable of performing tests on all modern-day rockets and supporting complex rocket engine development. RPT evaluates customer test requirements and desired outcomes while minimizing test time and cost. Now, Stennis Space Center is a national treasure, as you were quoted saying on your December visit to Stennis. Industry continues to look at utilizing Stennis Space Center for the expertise of its personnel, the 125,000 acre buffer zone, the A and B, and particularly the E test complex, and because of the abundance of propellant stored on site at Stennis. However, I have questions about whether Stennis will remain as a national treasure, given the ever-evolving nature of space exploration. So, Senator Nelson, do you believe that level funding for the rocket propulsion test budget into the foreseeable future will both keep pace with inflation and meet industry demand for commercial space company needs, defense space company needs, and NASA's own testing needs?
For the time being, Congressman, yes. But you have a beautiful opportunity to have the Stennis Space Center evolve into a propulsion test complex that will be government and commercial multi-users, not unlike what has happened to the Kennedy Space Center. That was primarily a government launch center, and now it is a multi-user spaceport. And with that 125,000 acres that you have there, you've got so many other opportunities. You, for example, have there the U.S. Navy that's involved. There are unlimited opportunities, but just in the area of rocket propulsion testing, it can become the place for commercial and government rocket engine testing.
Well, thank you, Senator Nelson. I agree with you. That's why the enhanced use lease agreement extensions are so important, and also helping the center look at economic development and sites, in attracting a new industry to the region is a win-win for everyone. My next question,
Congressman, on that, may I say, if you all could help us on the enhanced use lease, it's this herky-jerky 1 year at a time authorization. If y'all can give us that authorization for a number of years in the future, so we don't have to run around at the last minute getting some moving vehicle to attach enhanced use lease. And the congressman from Mississippi has just pointed out a good example.
Well, sir, I agree. And I think the House has been the leader on renewing enhanced use lease agreement. We had a 10-year bill that did pass. And when it came back from the other body, it was shortened tremendously. So I agree with you. The industry needs certainty. Industry needs stability. And we're hoping maybe this is the year we will give it to them. And real quick, last question, sir, can you tell us what you perceive NASA's role is and should be in helping the Department of Defense and the defense community to develop hypersonic capabilities? And does that extend to utilizing NASA's testing infrastructure?
I believe that some of it is classified, Congressman, but just suffice it to say that NASA's involved. And a lot of our expertise in space and aeronautics is considered valuable in research and development by across the broad spectrum of government. And the bottom line, I agree with you, Congressman, that we need to be very serious about developing hypersonic vehicles.
Well, Sir, thank you for your time. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Palazzo. And Representative Lawrence, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Cartwright. I just want to say to Administrator Nelson, I want to thank you for your continued work as the administrator and putting an emphasis on diversity and racial equity. I was so happy last month when Dr. Jessica Watkins became the first Black woman to a crew member on an international space station. And I look forward to the Artemis program that will land the first woman astronaut and Black astronaut on the lunar surface. I want to thank you for that. In the line of the diversity and inclusion, I have a question about minority-owned businesses. One of the things I hear constantly from the minority chambers and groups for women and minorities is the ability for you to shift the dial when it comes to procurement practices. So with the fiscal year 23 budget, what steps is NASA taking to ensure that women and minority-owned businesses are able to participate in the federal contracting? And if I could just add to that, when you say participating, I'm talking about more than your desire, but what's the checks and balances? Because you keep doing the same thing, you're gonna keep getting the same results, even though your heart is good. So what are we doing to ensure, to recruit, to train women and minority business to participate, to hopefully get more of the procurement contracts?
I want to answer you very specifically. I want to just give you first personally the way I ran my Senate office and the way that we are running this team here that I brought into NASA. 59% are women and 32% are people of color. We have taken diversity equity plan that Joe Biden announced. We have put together that plan. There is a printed version of it, and it reaches into every area, including the underrepresented areas, rural areas. What we're trying to do to make sure, for example, grants are given into minority communities and also rural communities that might have been excluded from those kind of scientific and space grants. It is very important to us that we not only do it with the workforce and the symbols that you just mentioned, such as the first woman, that the next landing will be the first woman, but also that we do it in how we are operating our contracts, our procurement. All of this has been part of it. It's also reflective in how we reach out on our STEM education to minority communities and underserved communities. So yes, ma'am, this is being taken seriously over here, and I would commend for your staff to get you a copy of our diversity plan, which is printed. And I think that will show you the breadth of how we are taking this seriously.
So is there any monitoring aspects of this? So you know where you are now, that we can actually see if that's your commitment, if it's actually coming to fruition?
I have named the deputy administrator to oversee this. That monitoring is going on a continuous basis. I can tell you that Susan Rice in the White House also is monitoring not only us, but every other federal agency.
So, Mr. Administrator, if I can ask just one quick question. When it comes to the environment, when it comes to electrifying vehicles and airplanes. Where is NASA when it comes to your commitment to reducing carbon footprints? And where are you with your technology to ensure that our future crafts that we're using are in line with our commitment to advance technology? Because there's a lot of carbon footprint that goes up with every plane.
I will be happy to answer that with the chairman's permission, since the clock ran out.
Yes, please go ahead and answer the question. Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Hugely. I mean, I can talk to you about the Earth Information Center that we're going to set up so that everything that is happening to the environment, in fact, is available to everybody, both private and public and school kids as well. I could point out to you not only what you mentioned, that we want aircraft to be much more efficient, the design of the wings. By the way, the wing tips, that came from NASA on a commercial airliner. They're a lot more efficient as a result of those wing tips on the end of the wings. I could point out to you the 5 great observatories that you are helping us fund that we're going to put up over the next 10 years, all of which will be integrated together to give us a 3D composite understanding of what is happening to our environment on the land, on the water, on the ice, and in the atmosphere. We never had that. That's what NASA is doing. When you see the concerns about the increased carbon dioxide and methane that's going into the air, where do you think that information comes from? It comes from NASA assets, maybe operated by NOAA or the USGS or others, but NASA designed them, built them, launched them, and most of them are being operated by NASA. So we are all over this, Madam Congressman. And I do thank you for that. It would take a lot more time for me to thoroughly answer your question.
Thank you so much, and I yield back. And thanks for having that on your radar.
Thank you, Representative Lawrence. We'll begin our second round of questioning. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Administrator Nelson, first of all, thank you for mentioning the internship program at NASA. To my mind, the greatest value of NASA is that it inspires young minds to go into STEM, and that's a great program, the internship program. If for people watching, to access that program, you go on nasa.gov and follow the Get Involved tab. Am I correct in that, sir?
Yes, sir. And may I insert for the Congresswoman, I neglected to say that we have our request $500 million for green aviation. And I think that would help underscore what I just said. And that's in the request to you all. I'm sorry to break the train of thought, but I wanted to get that in for the Congresswoman.
Administrator Nelson, I'm going to insist that you answer my questions and not other questions from other members, or share art tips with Charlie Crist, if you can control yourself.
Okay.
In all seriousness, we were discussing cost overruns and time overruns and some of the challenges at NASA with budgeting. But there have been some terrific successes with the same thing. And I wanted to mention the Lucy mission to the Trojan asteroids. That was launched in October 2021, a month ahead of schedule, and $57.2 million below baseline in its development costs. That was a terrific management win for the agency. And I wanted you to comment on that. How did that happen? And who gets the credit for that?
And I might also say Landsat 9 launched 2 months early with below its development cost, and the savings are in part due to mature flight hardware and a firm fixed price contract. And Lucy's savings are due in part to launch vehicle cost savings and some unused reserves that we use, to specifically answer your question.
All right, good. I want to switch over to lunar surface power. It's my understanding that NASA has been advancing multiple ways to provide power on the surface of the moon for sustained exploration and science missions. You've touched on that briefly so far, but I want to give you a bigger opportunity. The options include vertical solar array technology and fission surface power. At this point, it seems like no technology has a clear advantage. And so a mix of solutions might make the most sense, given cost constraints and varying mission profiles. Can you comment on NASA's plans to advance lunar surface power technologies, including whether or not the agency has plans for any demonstration missions to the moon in the next few years?
Mr. Chairman, if we find water next year, when we've got one of the commercial landers got a NASA instrument on it, it's going to dig down under the surface. We know there's water there because we've already seen it in the crevices of the rocks. It's in the form of ice. But underneath, is there water underneath the surface, and how much? And as I said earlier, if we have water, then we got hydrogen and oxygen. But to do that, you're going to have a lot of electricity. Now, at this point, if I had to guess, I would say that it's going to take nuclear fission power to get enough electricity to do it. But I can't say that with certainty. And that's what we're going to start looking at. Or can it be a combination with solar? I don't know, but that's what NASA does best. It's research and development.
Now, I want you to comment on the potential for vertical solar array technologies toward that end.
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Well, we'll do that. And at this point, I'm going to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to ask for unanimous consent to have my full opening statement made as part of the record. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I would like to add that.
Without objection.
Senator Nelson, as NASA looks to establish a long-term human presence on the moon and explore the outer bounds of the solar system, what role will NASA systems like the Space Launch System play to support NASA exploration and science missions, as well as non-NASA and international mission opportunities?
Well, right now, we've got the only big boy rocket in town. And that's our means of getting out to the moon and to getting further into space. Will there be others? I hope so. That's part of this public-private partnership. It is for the foreseeable future, we're planning on flying at least one Artemis a year for at least 10 or 12 years. And we know that when we go to Mars, we're going to have to develop new technologies. We've already discussed here earlier today that's in part going to need to be faster propulsion. So that'll be one of the things that we will be developing. But even so, you can take the slow boat to Mars by pre-positioning supplies. And you got to have a way of getting a lot of mass off the face of the earth. And thus far, there's only one rocket that can do that, and that's the SLS.
Thank you. What is your assessment of the threat that is posed by China's space ambitions? And does their exploration advancements on the moon and Mars give you concern?
Yes, sir. And I believe we are in, and have said this publicly before, I think we're in a space race with China. China in the last few years, they've done some impressive stuff. They're only the second nation to be with a rover on the surface of Mars, a rover that works. They now have a space station, and it's got impressive technology. They have declared that they are going to the moon. And I think we are not unlike the space race we were in with the Soviet Union. I think we're going to have that space race with the Chinese government in the future.
Well, that leads me to my next question. China's aggression is also prevalent in the research and development of various space technologies. And quite honestly, there's jarring similarities between the vehicle design made by the Chinese state rocket companies and vehicle designs made by American companies. And I'm sure you're well aware of that. What is NASA doing to secure American research and development, as well as any potential holes in our supply chain?
Supply chain's a problem, particularly now with a lot of the world's commerce being disrupted because of what's going on in Ukraine. I think you said it so delicately. I can't speak nearly as eloquently as you can, Congressman, but you noted that a lot of their space systems look like other space systems. Yeah, they're pretty good at stealing. And I think that's incumbent upon us to take cybersecurity very, very seriously. And as a former ranking member of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I've been shouting this message to the rooftops, not only with regard to the government, but the private sector as well. I think the private sector is finally getting the message.
Well, I think you need to keep doing that, because we must secure our research and development from the Chinese, and so please keep that up as you go forward. And now you'll back.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Trone, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Administrator Nelson, for joining us here today, and Chairman Cartwright and Ranking Member Adderholt for holding this hearing on the budget at NASA. Maryland is proud home of Goddard Space Flight Center, as well as a significant aerospace workforce. NASA supports over 35,000 jobs and billions of dollars of economic output in Maryland. My question is, there's 30 plus Maryland supplier companies that have helped build the systems for NASA's upcoming Artemis 1 mission. These are some of the thousands of supplier companies across the country that have helped build out NASA's first deep space exploration system since the end of Apollo. Can you discuss why it's important to have this broad and robust aerospace industrial supplier base here?
Because it works, and it's working. And not only is it working in the example that you've used, which is Artemis, look what that base has done with regard to this extraordinary success of the James Webb Space Telescope, also a project that was managed by Goddard. The talent at Goddard is superb. And you're very fortunate to have that caliber of folks, Congressman.
Talk about a minute about the importance of investing in small business, including women and veteran-owned businesses, especially given the market pressure for a lot of businesses to vertically integrate. And at the same time, we have the vets and women-owned businesses in certain regions at the expense of other suppliers. How do we balance that?
Earlier, I had a question from Congresswoman Lawrence about our approach to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that hits directly in the area of veterans as well as small business. We are taking that very, very aggressively, Congressman. And let me see if I can tell you, it's some incredible, I don't have the figure here, but NASA obligated $3.46 billion to small businesses. And on top of that, in fiscal year 21, NASA's prime contractors, so that's another avenue for small business, awarded an additional $3.7 billion to small business subcontractors. So right there between the two, that's over $7 billion just in fiscal year 2021 that was going to small business.
Wow. Let me ask one last question. On May 3, the Senate CJS Appropriations Committee hearing, you advocated for fewer cost plus contracts and more fixed price contracts. Outside of the existing commercial lunar payload services and human landing systems, what are the other areas of procurement that NASA is focused on using fixed price contracts to control costs?
Anything having to do, Congressman, with regard to where we are engaging the commercial sector. And the most obvious examples there are the commercial crew and commercial cargo, which has been so phenomenally successful in bringing down costs. Those are fixed price contracts. But as we go forward, instead of having a mindset of just a cost plus or a fixed price, particularly with regard to complicated research and development contracts, we're going to do different versions of cost plus, the idea of which is to get it down to be more efficient. For example, one of the things that we're going to change after the first 4 launches of Artemis is there were some 16 or 18 contracts all coming together for the SLS. We're going to consolidate that into one contract so one contractor is responsible there. It's another way of getting cost under control. All of this we are aggressively researching, and it's my hope that we're going to be able to implement it.
Thank you, Administrator, for joining us today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Mr. Garcia, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, just 2 quick questions. First of all, what is our plan to bring back the samples that we've been collecting on Mars with Perseverance and the last Mars rover? I know that the funding was there to get us there and conduct the experiments and the operations that have been ongoing, both with the helicopters as well as the rovers. But I think we were missing the tranche of funding needed to recover the samples that we've been collecting. Can you walk us through that plan and where that request is going to manifest?
Yes, sir. By the way, this is another area that you will see a manifestation of the space race with China. because China is on the surface of the Mars.
Yep.
And the question is, who's going to get the sample back first?
Right.
It is no small task to do this. So what we are planning, we already have a contract that we have let on a Mars ascent vehicle. So we're going to send a lander. It's going to have this ascent vehicle. We are deciding at this moment, as we speak, what is going to be the mechanism by which we deposit the samples. And let me show you this. It just so happens to be behind me. This is a titanium tube. The cores that the current rover Perseverance is drilling are being put in and sealed in these titanium tubes. And these tubes, some of them, they're going to do about 40 of them. And some of them are going to stay in the rover Perseverance, and some of them are going to be deposited on the surface. And so what we are deciding right now, and we're doing that so that we have a backup. So if you can't get one, you got at least a chance to get the others. We are deciding as to what is going to be the mechanism to transfer from Perseverance, the rover, and or the surface, those titanium tubes I just showed you, into the Mars ascent vehicle. It's going to take it up, and then we've got another one that is going to come by and grab it and bring it back and put it in a heat resistant, ablative heat shield that will come and land. And I think this one's going to land in the Utah desert. Now, a lot of this is gee whiz stuff to get the sample back. But that's what we're doing.
And so is that funding in the out years, or do you have the leading edges of that, at least the design study money already in these budget requests? I'm just not seeing a significant footprint.
The answer is both. And an example of that, we just let the contract for the Mars ascent vehicle.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Last question, you mentioned China. This is obviously a new space race, right? It's a renaissance, really a new golden era for our space program, but also for other nations. Some of them have signed on to the Artemis Accords. We've got to make sure that this domain is one of transparency, of peace, freedom of liberties, navigation. The Artemis Accords are meant to do that. What is NASA doing to continue to spread signatures or get more folks to sign on to it? And what are you doing relative to China and Russia, who are currently not on it, but we need to continue to have those diplomatic negotiations to ensure this isn't, effectively Star Wars in our own between here in the moon, as well as within our own solar system.
19 countries have signed the Artemis Accords. You would expect something like the UK, but you might not expect Ukraine. You might not expect United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Colombia, Israel, and so 19 of them. We're going to continue to get companies. And what is the Artemis Accords? It's basically like a standard operating procedure out in space and utilization of space for peaceful purposes. Now, it's no secret that the Russian and the Chinese government space programs are all mixed in with their military programs. So we've seen the reluctance on them to touch anything like this. So we're going to continue to push it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Palazzo, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Nelson, Senator Nelson, I apologize. Recently, you said that cost plus contracts are a plague, and yet Space Act agreements are set up as cost plus. Can you please explain that statement and how that mentality stands to affect space centers like Space Center in my district?
Well, it affects every center because it's all a part of the cost. We want to get leaner and meaner, Congressman. We want to stop these contracts from growing and growing. And the chairman gave a couple of examples, Lucy and I mentioned Landsat 9 that came in under cost and were quicker than what they were originally scheduled to be. That's what we want to be. But you got to tailor the contract to the specific mission that you're contracting for. You can't do everything cost plus. I mean, you can't do everything fixed price, nor should you do everything cost plus. So there are iterations of cost plus, particularly on your research and development contracts.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. We got to become leaner and meaner. And I appreciate the fact that you brought up that we truly are in a space race with the Chinese and to some extent the Russians. We wouldn't be in the space race if it wasn't for their direct theft and stealing of our intellectual patents, our NASA research and technology. And so, look, we can't go back and rewrite our security protocols and things of that nature. But in the past, I mean, way in the past, when I first got here, the culture of securing our secrets really was lackadaisy. Can you tell me what has NASA done to improve the culture? Because it's top down. I know in the past it's like, hey, we want to share our documents. We're, again, the mission of NASA, and you have scientists and they want to cooperate across the globe. But at the same time, we had people getting on planes with laptops and going back to Beijing. And so what are we doing to protect our secrets now? Because we are not, I wouldn't say in a life and death, but we are in a race for the space domain. And we need freedom-loving democracies to be the ones that are dominant and in control, not these countries that are have nefarious plans to use space to their own personal gain.
Well, directly related to you, Congressman, as a committee member, is that we have requested $667 million, which represents a 9% increase over the 22 request. And that's for the IT program to develop, modernize, and enhance the agency's cybersecurity capabilities, the implementation of a robust IT supply chain risk management. We discussed that earlier as well. And to use technology, data, and AI, machine learning and automation to strengthen our NASA workforce. So we're making this request. Now, by the way, this isn't just NASA, this is every element of government. And as I said earlier in a previous question, I was the ranking member of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and this is all over the government, and it's the private sector as well.
It truly is. Senator, thank you for your leadership at NASA, and you have a great workforce. I know personally, I've seen Michoud, Stennis Space Center, Johnson, as well as the other centers. You got a great workforce, and they want to continue to be the leader in space, and we're going to do everything we can to help you. So thank you, sir. Chairman,
thank you.
Back.
you, Mr. Palazzo. At this time, I'm going to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for a third, just to kick off a third round of questioning so we can accommodate his schedule. Mr. Adderholt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nelson, how does NASA plan to sustain a healthy workforce if there's not a future national programs like Shuttle, like ISS, SLS, and Orion to cover these functions?
Well, I think there will be. For example, you're talking about just the human program, and I'll address that. But what about all the other programs? Science, that's if I recall, that's about an $8 billion part of our budget. And just think what excitement there is in the science area. If your question really is, what is the future of the Marshall space program, the Space Center, I think it is very robust. There, for the foreseeable future, you're going to continue to have the SLS. But a big part of what we talked about earlier today was nuclear. Look at all the things in nuclear that the Marshall Space Center could do. On the, well, let me just stop there and you take it from there. Where else do you want to go with it?
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, that this day, I think hit on it, and I think that's we have. So, it's something that I want you to be mindful of, because I think it's something we need to address. Let me shift gears and talk about just a bit about, I strongly support commercial LEO destination programs and that further empower the industry. I do see a concern in the complete absence of explicitly U.S. government entity in LEO, especially given China still has a government presence in LEO after ISS. Do you also have concerns over a lack of U.S. entity involvement in LEO after the end of the International Space System Service?
No, sir, I don't, because we're not going to have the government sector leave LEO. We're just going to take the precious few dollars that you give us, and we're going to direct them out into the cosmos instead of doing everything ourselves in LEO. And we're going to become a tenant or a lessee of commercial space stations in low Earth orbit so that we can spend those precious dollars in developing the technologies as we explore the heavens. I really don't see that. And if the commercial area were to never develop, which I think is stretching credulity, because look what has happened in the commercial sector with regard to space already. But if it never did, I think there's plenty of other reasons why the U.S. government would not give up LEO.
Well, I just want to point to the fact that, a complete absence of U.S. government entity in LEO, in light of the fact that China will still have a government presence there, I think is something that we need to be thinking about. And so I do, want to call that to your attention. Let me switch now. Maintaining and enhancing U.S. leadership in space is critical to our economic security, our national defense, and diplomatic relations. For far too long, we have allowed China and other adversaries to challenge our space dominance, and their ambitions only continue to grow, as you've already mentioned. To remain a global space power, the United States must have a clear vision for space that endures political pressure and changing administrations. We must maintain an aggressive cadence of deep space exploration and space missions, develop new cutting edge technologies, and establish long lasting alliances with other countries, and hold NASA and commercial partners accountable to ambitious timelines. How does the FY23 request that's being put forward ensure U.S. leadership in space itself?
I think by the whole budget. I would have to go back and say that the course that NASA was set on a dozen years ago is a public-private partnership of leveraging government NASA dollars in a way that extends our ability to research and develop new systems and techniques in order to push the bounds of human exploration. And that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be one of the more exciting times. The first exciting time was when it was almost the impossible, landing on the moon, and that was a half century ago.
Yeah, well, let me just say, I think that the FY23 request needs to be sufficient to ensure that U.S. leadership in space can meet the timeline to return to the moon and moving forward. So with that, I know my time is elapsed, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
And that's what we're counting on you all to help us.
Okay,
thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Adderholt. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes now for the third round. Senator Nelson, you have a good sense for why I like NASA. We know that stimulating and inspiring young minds to go into science, technology, engineering, and math is so important. If you look at the creation of wealth in this country, so much of it has always come from technological and scientific breakthroughs. You look at the Fortune 500 companies right now, the ones crowding the top did not exist a generation and a half ago because they're all based on some scientific or technology breakthrough that was the product of an inspired young mind in the United States of America. I see that as NASA's job number one, to keep these young people inspired into going into STEM pursuits. Now, right, and Mr. Adderholt just touched on it, and I want to follow up with him. We're looking at the end of the International Space Station, and NASA's funding efforts to replace that with as you say, LEO, low Earth orbit, private sector space stations, 3 of them. And the concern I have is that right now, because NASA's in control of the International Space Station, it gives NASA natural advantages. It means that NASA can arrange for video conferences with school districts and a wide range of other benefits that can engage students in the space program. And the concern is that when we transition to private sector, NASA is no longer the landlord. NASA is now a tenant in the new situation. And so the question is, how can we maintain that ability, that connectivity between students and the space stations to continue this kind of a STEM engagement? How are these activities going to be maintained? Does NASA have to pay for them? And can we use the contracting process to ensure the protection of the educational activities, maybe in the same way that broadcasters can be required to have a certain amount of educational programming as a condition of their airwaves leases? Will you comment on that, Senator Nelson?
Mr. Chairman, if we have a commercial space station after another 9 or 10 years, it's like if you're the owner of an apartment building and I rent or I'm a lessee of an apartment, you're not going to tell me what I can and cannot do in my own apartment. And it'll be the same way on a commercial space station. We will be a lessee to do this, and that activities. And so since you know that what you just stated about students and bringing in the average Joe on Earth into all the exciting things by having these direct hookups, not only for interactions on telecommunications and press conferences and conversations with students, but also the kind of activities that are going on that commercial space station. These stations are being built with NASA seed money. That's the three that you just mentioned. And as a result, there's going to be certain requirements that we're going to require. So I'm not concerned about that, Mr. Chairman, at all.
Good.
By the way, we're going to do the same thing eventually on what is in effect going to be a lunar space station. We're calling it Gateway. It's more of an outpost because we're not planning right now to man it the full time like we are the ISS.
Good. So we can count on you to make sure those understandings are built into any of these agreements coming up.
Yes, sir.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to yield to Congressman Ed Case of Hawaii for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Administrator. Good to be back. Sorry to miss the last 45 minutes or so. And you may well have answered some of this, and you were answering it with the ranking member just now. But can I ask you kind of a macro question, which is on my mind? And that is that our geopolitical world has shifted on its axis in many ways in the last months and year. Russia and Ukraine has obviously changed some very, very basic understandings. Certainly the rise of China in a way that we don't believe is appropriate to the world in many areas, including intellectual property theft, the manipulation of information and research for military and other purposes, which in and of itself all countries do, but is a particular concern given China's actions. It all asks us to revisit assumptions about how we partner with the rest of the world in our own initiatives and our own research and development. And we obviously have tried as hard as we can to leave space exploration and space and earth science out of this. We still have cooperative ventures with both of those countries and other adversaries. Is there anything that you think we need to change in our basic approach as to authorizing and financing NASA? Are there risk areas where we should simply put on far greater guardrails than we have to date on our expenditures in R&D, for example? To what extent should we consider delinking some of the cooperative ventures that have been very successful to date? It's just a broader question that's on my mind. And I think we have to ask these questions.
You want me to answer one of those questions first, Congressman?
I guess I put a lot into one question, but what kind of difference funding and authorization approaches should we take given the change in the geopolitical climate, even in just the last year, with specific respect to Russia and China?
Well, let's understand and nail down the prospect that our space program is an international space program. For example, on the space station, we've got some 30 nations that participate. Look at the space station. We built it with the Russians. We have to operate it with the Russians. They have the propulsion, we have the electricity. Look at the modules. There is an ESA, European Space Agency module. There's a Japanese Space Agency module. Look at the Lunar Space Station or Gateway. The Europeans and the Japanese are participating there as well. And so, given the fact that look at in Houston right now, we've got a crew of 2 astronauts from the United Arab Emirates. One of whom is going to be flying on a SpaceX vehicle with a NASA crew. Look at the last crew to go up. Samantha is a Italian astronaut. She's up there with 3 NASA astronauts right now. The crew 3 that just returned, a German astronaut. Before that, a French astronaut. And so, I mean, I could go on and on. Now, the thrust of your question is, with the changing politics on the surface of the face of the earth, how are we going to keep this going? Well, we're going to do it very carefully. And I can tell you that we have seen nothing but professionalism from the cosmonauts on board the space station, and we have seen nothing but a professional relationship in both the Moscow and the Houston mission control centers, and the way our people, our NASA people, are being treated in Moscow, and the way those Russian folks connected with the mission control in Houston are being treated. And so I think we take it day by day, but at this point, I have expectations that space is the one place in the civilian space program where you can accomplish extraordinary international things. And the interesting thing, all this started in the midst of the Soviet Union and the Cold War, when an American spacecraft and a Soviet spacecraft rendezvoused and docked. And those crews lived together, worked together, and as proof thereof, became lifelong friends. So that when the commander of the Soviet spacecraft just recently passed away a couple of years ago, who gave the eulogy at his funeral? None other than General Tom Stafford, the commander of the American in Apollo Soyuz. So I think it's we're just going to have to work it day by day.
I agree with everything you said, Mr. Administrator. You know, space has been the great hope and dream for kind of a safe zone for humankind. I think the implications, and I agree with you on the space station itself, I think the implications are broader than that to our broader research and development programs. And so I'll just leave it there. I just think these are questions we must ask, and I agree with you. We got to take it as we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Senator Nelson, we have come to the end of the today's hearing. Thank you for submitting yourself to our questions. Thank you for continuing to follow up on those questions, many of which will be submitted in writing afterward, including from me. Thank you also for coming to Pennsylvania last month for the Keystone Space Collaborative Conference that we held in Pittsburgh. It was a very beneficial conference, and it was capped off by the unveiling of the Peregrine lunar lander by Astrobotic right there in Pittsburgh. That was a memorable event. I thank you for coming to that. Thank you for your service, and thanks for appearing before our subcommittee today. With that, I declare this hearing adjourned.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.